Anger is inevitable when our lives consist of giving in and going along. When we assume responsibility for other people's feelings and reactions. When we relinquish our primary responsibility to proceed with our own growth and ensure the quality of our own lives. When we behave as if having a relationship is more important than having a self. Harriet Lerner, The Dance of Anger. Anger. Our world is one that is becoming increasingly online. One where everyone not only has a voice, but can even have multiple voices depending on their motives. A world where confusion and confliction have become a marketable product. A world that is obsessed both with convincing you that you will never be enough and that all the causes of your pain lie outside of yourself. One where advice and wisdom on complicated topics is routinely monochromatized and dumbed down, not to maximize understanding, but to maximize engagement. The last couple episodes have talked about how our early relationships teach us how to shame ourselves, suppress ourselves, and shapeshift to become a safe, likable version of ourselves. This episode, however, is more about how, right now, today, many of us are still being bombarded on a minute-to-minute basis with misguided or bad faith advice that is quietly but powerfully undermining our ability to be truly authentic. Eradicating our ability to be honest with our loved ones, and most harmful of all, our ability to build a healthy relationship with ourselves. Welcome to episode 6 of I Hope I'm Wrong. This is The Signal Fire. The oversimplification of everything is a concept I have no doubt will be spoken of quite frequently on this podcast as it moves forward. It is a concept that can be applied to a great many things in our increasingly pixelated world. There are many reasons for this. It can be attributed to a world where people have begun to believe having an opinion is credential enough to make it a valid opinion. It can be attributed to a populace that is more aware of the language and dynamics of human psychology than ever, that still was never taught the skills to properly do the work to use them. It can also be attributed to the fact that the digital age has led to focus that shifts in seconds, not minutes, which in turn has led every content algorithm available to reward brevity and impact over accuracy. Whatever it may be, our world has become one where the content we digest on a daily basis serves more to soothe our insecurities rather than force us to confront ideas we are uncomfortable with. The idea I want to talk about today is anger. What is anger? Why do we feel anger? Why is anger almost universally shamed and seen as an inferior emotion, even though it kind of seems like people are becoming angrier by the day? What if being ashamed and fearful of anger is actually leading us to engage in the very behaviors we're attempting to avoid by silencing it? If you're able to, do me a favor. Pause the podcast right now and go do a Google search for anger quotes. You may come across an AI-driven explanation that digs somewhat accurately into the meaning of anger and many of the quotes surrounding it. But many of the actual quotes you will find are not only simple and dopamine friendly, but they all suggest that anger is a negative emotion that can only result in doom and regret. For example, when anger rises, think of the consequences. Speak when you are angry, and you'll make the best speech you'll ever regret. If you are patient in one moment of anger, you will escape 100 days of sorrow. You will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. What do all these quotes, some of which are from universally celebrated philosophers, all have in common? They all suggest that when you feel angry, your first impulse should be to not feel angry, to not do, well, anything, unless you somehow magically don't feel angry about the thing anymore. And yes, I know that if you take a few moments to actually reflect on these quotes, there's a deeper message being conveyed. But remember, we don't live in a world where quiet reflection is rewarded. We live in a world where likes are. So most people are not reading these quotes and reflecting deeply on the meaning of anger. They are reading these quotes and hearing angry equals bad. They are being immediately and continuously conditioned to believe that anger is a shameful thing to feel, while at the same time being inundated with the idea that every feeling they have is actually completely valid. And listen, I'm not here telling you that unbridled anger is a good thing either. These dopamine factories we call apps deliver to us a daily stream of videos highlighting example after example of deeply angry people doing truly unhinged shit because, I don't know, they're still mad about not making the varsity football team or something. The gluttonous indulgence of anger is just as harmful, if not more so, than the desperate repression of it. Anger is, like most things human, an emotion that requires far more depth and nuance than we tend to give it. So let's talk about it. Let's start with the obvious question. What is anger? Biologically speaking, anger is a nervous system response that begins when we perceive that something that we value has been threatened or violated. The nervous system then seeks to restore that sense of safety, often through assertion, boundary setting, or confrontation. The thing violated is often a boundary, but it can also be a breach of trust, respect, autonomy, or consistency. And yeah, there is a difference. We'll touch on that in a future episode. In close relationships, anger is often thought of as the big moments of conflict when, in reality, it's usually the quiet, repeated breaches that actually generate the most anger. These breaches can range from massive, such as infidelity or other betrayals, to more subtle examples like neglect or dismissiveness. Let me say this plainly though. Anger is 100% normal and healthy. You are supposed to feel angry when your boundaries are violated. So what's the issue then? Why is everyone acting like anger is this horrible thing? Well, that's because resolution of anger requires the skills to resolve it properly, and surprise, surprise, most humans lack the skill set to actually resolve that anger in a healthy way. Most people struggle to resolve the anger they have at themselves within themselves, so asking them to be able to resolve anger when a whole other human being is involved seems like the definition of a losing battle. Anger isn't typically the problem. It's what we choose to do with it that is. The most significant way this has manifested for me recently, and honestly is still manifesting for me, is something I mentioned in an earlier episode. The relationship I'm coming out of did not start in the healthiest of ways. We'll get into it more later, but what matters here is that when it was beginning, I was involved with my ex while she was still coming out of a dysfunctional relationship, and there was a significant amount of overlap. Eventually, feelings came into play, and we decided to actually try to build something real. But before that happened, I told her really clearly, if at some point you want to reach out to this person for closure, I understand that. I'm okay with it. Just be honest with me about it so we can talk about it and set some boundaries. That's important. Because once we officially started dating, something fell off. Not explosively wrong, just a distance had opened up. And I tried to be really conscientious of her history and the fact that relationships had not been safe or healthy for her in the past. So about a year in, we're like living together at this point. We were sitting in a U-Haul because we had been helping my friend move some furniture or something. And she's showing me something on her phone when I see this guy's name pop up in a text notification. I ask her, what's going on here? Why is this person messaging you? Because this isn't the magical first text. You know what I mean? Like, why am I finding out about this way? And her explanation is that she wanted to smooth things over. And what immediately hits me isn't just that they're talking, it's the part where I had explicitly said a year earlier that I was fine with this as long as you tell me. I'll be okay with it. And instead, she chose to hide it. And when I ask why she hid it, she tells me she thought I would be mad. And ironically, that's the part I really got mad at. Because now I'm not just dealing with her hiding this contact by itself. I'm dealing with being lied to about something that I had already said I could handle, that I had already expressed being okay with, as long as it was in a transparent way. So over the next couple days, the conversation didn't really go anywhere. A lot of defensiveness, not much accountability, but I care about her. And despite how bad this is, and yeah, this is a pretty big fuck up, I decided to try to move forward on the condition that it doesn't happen again. Fast forward 3 years, and shocker, this happens again. I find out they've been talking for at least a month, and this time during that same period, I had directly asked if she had heard from him, and she told me no. So now it's not just omission, now it's like outright lying after 4 years together. When I confront her, I'm calm, but I'm also completely lost as to what to do here. Because at this point, I've extended an enormous amount of trust, not just around this, but around a lot of other things too. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the fact that it just keeps being violated over and over. And again, I get almost the same explanations, the same deflections, the same, I thought you would be mad if I told you excuse. And looking back, this should have been the moment I walked away. But by then, years in, I was deeply embedded. Sunk cost fallacy, push-pull dynamics, and a growing belief that maybe this is just what relationships look like. Like, maybe this is just what I deserve, and this is as good as it's going to get. So once again, I swallow my anger. I tell myself understanding is maturity. I tell myself patience is love. I tell myself this is something I can absorb. I couldn't. The disloyalty, the broken trust, the broken respect. While I told myself I was doing the mature thing by moving past it, I didn't realize it hadn't disappeared. It had just turned into resentment. And that resentment didn't show up as explosions. It leaked out quietly, in my tone, in my patience, in how quickly I became irritated, and how much less capacity I had to stay open and generous. What I thought was self-control was actually unresolved anger, slowly changing how I showed up. So, it took me months after the breakup to fully realize how much I had swallowed. Not just in this relationship, but as just a general rule of my existence. Because from childhood, I was conditioned to believe that my anger was an inconvenience, something to manage quietly so other people could remain comfortable. That my boundaries, my sense of respect, my reactions were negotiable elements to be reshaped around other people's inability to deal with their own discomforts. As a child with ADHD especially, I had two things: poor emotional regulation and poor impulse control. This meant that when I was angry, I was angry. I have no doubts of the challenges that come with raising a child with ADHD for even the most well-equipped and prepared parents. But most people have parents that are moderately or barely equipped for parenthood at all. I'm no exception. And like many children in the 90s, my behaviors were not seen as the result of a medical or psychological condition that required specific solutions, but as a simple disciplinary failure. To this day, my father still believes that simply beating my ass more often would have magically resolved all of these issues. The problem is, unresolved anger doesn't disappear. It relocates, it changes form, it breaches the surface in different ways: irritability, numbness, resentment, collapse. It becomes a weapon we start aiming at people who don't deserve it. We start punishing people for crimes others have committed against us. And perhaps worst of all, we begin inflicting that anger upon ourselves. We begin punishing ourselves, sabotaging our own ability to be happy and loved because we've internalized that anger. And the quotes may be simple, but they do have one thing right. Choices made from anger alone are rarely healthy choices. At the same time, we exist within a society that has deemed anger to be an existential threat. A society where any displays or admittance of feeling angry is viewed with equal parts fear and disgust by most people. We are fed a steady diet of information that, while perhaps well-meaning, is often far too simplified to paint the correct picture of such a complex emotion. Anger is, at its core, a signal fire. A sign. A sign that something has been broken. A sign that something has been lost that must be found again. Anger isn't something you should act from. That's true. But it is a sign that you should act.